Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. With details about grim and grisly fatalities, this history of California's arcane deaths encompasses the murders and accidents that at one time shocked the West Coast. The stories of hangings, gun accidents, suicides, crashes, and overdoses of both the famous and obscure offer a bizarre, if sometimes perverse, glimpse into the Golden State's strange past, including frightening murder tales like the rape, torture, and child murder in The Ape Boy, a doctor slaughters his family in Death in Davis House, the unsolved savage murder of an entire family in the Ketty murders, and a young female psychopath in Penny for Her Thoughts. The book that we are featuring this evening is Death in California, the bizarre, freakish, and just curious ways people die in the Golden State, with my special guest journalist and author, David Kulczyk. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview. David Kulczyk.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Thank you very much. It wasn't so long ago we spoke to you, and so thank you for pinch hitting today for this interview. So thank you very much. Let's dive right into this. What I find fascinating with this retro crime here, historic true crime, is all the things I didn't know about strange true crime history. So we won't be talking about too many stories, but we'll feature about, just like in the introduction, we'll feature about 5 or 6 stories that really give people an idea of what kind of book this is and some of the stories that are contained in. But for our audience, and I think for anybody that might buy this book, find it fascinating, your introduction, and you talk about the headlines have always been that murder in California, and but tell us about the state of before there was a really good reason to come to California. The people that were there first, we'll say, in this country we call them Aboriginals or First Nations. Talk about how, for those first people, murder was pretty foreign concept to them, and why.
Yeah, the Aborigines that lived in California before the invasion of the Europeans, they lived at the Garden of Eden. They traded with each other, and they basically had their villages along the major rivers that flow through the valleys. And, of course, they're on the coast and things like that. But the big population was in the valleys of the Sacramento, the San Joaquin, and along the rivers that flow into those 2 rivers that it's named after. And they had villages about every couple miles. Actually, I lived right by one that used to be one of the largest ones in California. They even had restaurants. They found evidence that there were restaurants there, which I find just fascinating. But they did not murder each other, and if they did, it was a very big deal. They basically lived in harmony and traded and married up and down the rivers into the San Francisco Bay. They've found maybe 150 miles inland seashells that were from the San Francisco Bay. So they had this wide-ranging trading area. And then right around when Kit Carson came through, they all caught smallpox and measles, and 90% of them died. So by the time the gold rush happened, the Aborigines that lived here, it was kind of like Mad Max, where, you know, they were just the stragglers or survivors of a great disaster.
I think one of the most profound things was and I want to expand upon what type of, again, might sound idealistic, but what kind of, we'll say simple, it wasn't very much population at that time, but we're still a society, definitely a distinct society. But what was the punishment for something like murder, and why was that punishment in that society? Why did that suffice? So what did they do, and how did that work?
Yeah, if someone did commit murder, and they would be banished by their families in the village and all the other villages, and they were snubbed by all the other villages and tribes. Word got around really fast. And they would be outcasts in their own societies. They would be just complete losers. They'd be out of the loop. They would be banished from their families, and that was everything to them. And a lot of times if they did, let's say it was accidental and someone got murdered, then the village would work out a deal with the other village where it happened, because it never happened in the same village. There was never murders within their village, ever. If they were goofing around with another tribe, they would have to, the person that murdered would be forced to be their servant at that village for whatever amount of years that they arranged. And so once they did their sentence, then everything would be forgiven.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the juxtaposition that you present even in the introduction and in your other book about murder in California as well, is that this society was unique in that, again, I've never heard tell of anything like this, where the society itself made sure or ensured that people wouldn't murder because there was nowhere else to go. Unlike how our society is, if somebody is a deviant of society, they're put in a prison, but within the prison, then they have a community, we'll say, and once they get out of prison, or even before, there's certainly a division, but in that primitive, we'll say, society, unbelievably, murder was a very, very rare thing. Now, you talk about the real impetus for people coming to California and for people over the centuries or over the decades coming to California, and tell us what that reason is, and tell us about the headline about the murder in terms of murder in California and family members. Once these people had gone to California, they were looking at the newspaper. So tell us a little bit about that phenomena once California was a very popular place to go to.
Well, even today, there's always a headline in a magazine or newspaper or internet site that says "Death in California." It seems to be that's probably the most used headline ever. And California, it's the sheer size of it is just mind-boggling. And with all the we have over 100 mountain ranges in California, and 45% of the land in California is covered by forests. I think that's a lot of things that people don't think of, how forested this area is. People come here. They always come here to change their lives, to have a new opportunity. We've had gold rushes, we've had land rushes, we've had multiple land rushes. If there's a bubble that's going to start, it's going to start here. And any fad, it's going to start here in California. This is where everything starts. And there's you can make a go at things in California if you really have a shot at it. You can really have a shot at having something work out to your advantage living here.
But you talk about really the gold rush being the impetus for much more than just migration in terms of a real impetus for murder. I mean, the incredible profits that were at least imagined and realized by some people was a real good impetus for murder suddenly being a lot more common and not rare at all.
Well, yeah, anytime you have something of value, there's always going to be somebody there that's going to want to take it away from you. There's a lot of ways to die in California. There's a lot of industry. There's farming accidents can happen pretty easily, and there's 1,000 ways to die in California.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get to that right away because we have some incredible stories to cover in here. The more, again, you say bizarre, freakish, and just curious. Well, we'll get to the bizarre and the freakish and murderous. And let's start off with one really colossal story because this is amazing. You include, too, oftentimes you don't really get good photos, but you have some fantastic photos of the ape boy. So let's talk about the circumstances that the ape boy in Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, talking to a Canadian named Sanford Clark and an American consulate in Vancouver. So tell us about the ape boy.
Well, the ape boy, and I did not know about this at all until I was doing this book. And what happened is I came across, I was looking for some other story, and I came across the trial of this, and I had to go, discover it. I was shocked that I never knew about it. And as soon as Death in California came out, 2 books came out about the ape boy. But it was, well, put it this way, I had to stop writing this chapter for a couple of months. I just put it aside and worked on some other ones because I was getting too disturbed by it. This guy, Sanford Clark, he came into the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and he told them about his cousin. And even right
he's
now,
14 years old. Got to tell the audience he's 14 years old.
Yeah, he came in and told him about his cousin Gordon Northcott, and told him that he was he had a chicken ranch in this town called Wineville, which is in Riverside County, east of Los Angeles, and he told them that he was kidnapped from his home in Saskatchewan in 1926 and kept in this decrepit ranch against his will. And he told tales of the kidnapping, rape, and torture and murder all committed by his uncle. And that's Gordon Northcott. He was 21 years old. And he claimed that his uncle was going to kill him if they ever let anyone know about what was going on. So the police department went out there with Riverside police, and they just found like a horrible, horrible scene. They found blood-stained stairs, blood was everywhere, cots, bloody axes, a hatchet that had hair on it, just the most disgusting thing. And there were 3 recently exhumed graves, and they had the imprint of the bodies in the dirt in the bottom, and they found bone fragments. Actually, by the time it was over, they found 2 bushel baskets of bone fragments scattered out throughout that property. There was like there was clothing that young boys would wear, and the police found this horrible mess. And this one kid, 9-year-old Walter Collins, he went to a movie, and he lived in Los Angeles area, went to a movie, never returned. And that's kind of like what would happen. He would either lure the kids to the ranch saying that there was a job or work, or he would just kidnap them. And his uncle, Gordon, would overpower them and tie them to a cot and rape and torture them for as long as he felt like it, and then he would kill them. I was like just stunned. I'm still kind of stunned at the story that such a thing could even happen, especially in 1926.
And what did the nephew have to do, Sanford Clark? What was, besides witnessing some of it, what was his entire role in this, which is even more disturbing?
Oh, he would have to help him, tie him up and all that stuff, and he'd have him. In one case with that Clark boy, he had him carry his decapitated head in a bucket to a different shed on the property. There was a Hispanic boy that they found, like his headless body, out in the desert area, and that was one of his victims too. They never did find out who that kid was. He said that Clark was out hiding out at a miner's cabin in the Mint Valley, which I believe the Mint Valley is full of homes now. And back in 1926, it was just desert. And he went and saw a miner. He had a friend that was a miner out there, and Northcott killed the miner with his friend. And when they were looking for a mine shaft to throw the guy in, they found this Hispanic boy hiding. And so he took him back to his ranch and did his torture routine with him for a week. And they ended up shooting that boy and chopping off his head. That's when Stanford had to carry it out. So the police found the body along the roadside near this town of Norco, and they couldn't identify him. They never did identify him. One time there was a married couple came to work on the farm, and Stanford or Gordon was arguing with his mother. He was really babied by his mother, as she was just dotted on. And his family actually bought him the chicken ranch to keep him out of trouble and to give him some kind of occupation because he was such a oddball. And so this couple were there, and Gordon and his mother started arguing about them, and they did the right thing and just kind of, quietly got in their car and took off. He had already dug the two graves for them.
Now, the police they put out this all points bulletin for the capture of Gordon and his mother and his father. And so pretty soon they meet up with the elderly Northcott. What does he tell him? What does the father tell him? He's 64 years old. What does he say about his son?
He wasn't very proud of his son. He actually told the police and the press that he was an ape boy, that he was covered with hair when he was born. He was like a chimpanzee, and he thought he was this horrible person. He would Gordon would go around, and he always wore lipstick, which is kind of funny, especially in 1926. And but he was definitely just very, very disturbed. His father, later on in the trial, it came out that his father was actually his uncle. He was what would you say? Not a victim, but he was the result of an incestuous relationship between his sister and his father.
Yeah. Now, the police asked the father, Cyrus, they said, did he tell you about the murders? He said, yeah, he told me about the murders, but I don't believe anything he said, and I didn't believe what he had said. But again, he didn't say that, no, my son's innocent. He basically said he's a rotten guy and forced us to, just moved in with us, basically, So, now, tell us about the actual capture, because we'll have to get to the trial, which is absolutely something out of a very, very bizarre movie. So tell us about the capture of the ape boy.
Oh, he was when the police found him in Calgary, Alberta. He was on his mom was there, and they caught her there, and he was disguised as a female. They captured him on a train in Vernon, British Columbia, and immediately, as soon as he was caught, it was like the biggest time of his life. He was totally grandstanding, about what he did and what he was, and the police thought that he was preparing for an insanity plea, and he was insane. I mean, to fight extradition, Canada turned him over to the Los Angeles Police Department. They rode on a train all the way back down to Los Angeles, and he totally talked about what he did the entire time, and he was like a showboat. He wanted the attention. He loved the attention.
Well, that extends his narcissistic personality, is that when he makes this confession, but then he goes to court, pleads not guilty, and, of course, defends himself.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this defense, because there is a moment in this trial that is truly, I've never read anything like it. So tell us a little bit about how the trial proceeds. It's a ridiculous one, but just tell him about his demeanor and what he acted like at his own trial.
Yeah, he was just. It is really one of the most bizarre cases, don't you think? I mean, it's just outrageous. He was proud. He said that he would be, by defending himself. Everyone says that you have a fool for an attorney when you defend yourself, and he said it'd be worth it. My name would become known all over the world, which is so funny because I've never, and I've been digging into this murder stuff, since 1980, and I never heard of this guy until then. So he wasn't, known like he was, but he would stick his jaw out while people were testifying against him. He'd make like these big gestures. I guess the funniest thing for me is he cross-examined himself, and he'd turn his head one way when he asked a question, and he'd turn his head the other way when he'd answer it in a different voice. It was just bizarre. And he brought up about his sister. He had all these people. They had to be brought out there from Canada and stuff, and accused his sister of being his mother. And his father was also his grandfather, but, it had nothing to do with the case. He asked his cousin, how did she get a black eye, and how did she know that he gave her a black eye? And she answered you punched me in the eye with your fist. Mm-hmm. So it's just, he would talk to the reporters during breaks and things, and saying it was just horrible. What did you think was the weirdest thing? Did I get that?
Well, I think that is the weirdest thing, a cross-examination of yourself. I mean, I've seen the thing where he's cross-examining, like you say, his sister, and he said, because you hit me in the face. The only time I've ever really seen that is the guy that killed all the people on the subway on a train, and he then was cross-examining. He was defending himself and cross-examining the victims and asking them absurd questions like that, and he was... Yeah,
they were like, because I saw you shot me.
Yeah. The most heinous and disgusting part and heartbreaking part is when it was exposed that Northcott made the couple of these Winslow boys write a letter to their parents explaining that they had ran away from home, and then right after that testified, and then the Sanford Clark, the 14-year-old, said that the nephew said as soon as the boys were done with the letters, they were killed.
Yeah.
And
and allegedly his mother killed, I think, the Collins boy, where she just got fed up with him raping him for so long and beating him that she ran up and hit him in the head with an axe to put the kid out of his misery. That Christine Collins, her son, was missing, and she went to the police about it, and they were like, "Oh, he'll come back." And then they found this kid, a runaway somewhere, and he kind of looked like the kid. So they asked him, and the kid said, "Yeah, sure." they put him on a train with a cop to Los Angeles, and when Christine Collins saw him, she said, "That's not my son." And the sheriff from the Los Angeles Police Department said, "Well, you might get used to him. Try him out for a while. You might get used to him." And when she came to the police department with his dental records and other evidence, they locked her up in an insane asylum. And that's right when the case broke out. She was there for about 4 days when the whole thing opened up about Gordon.
And it was interesting too. That is, they've taken that one incident with the woman being hospitalized and them trying to impose this child that wasn't hers clearly on her, and then deeming her mentally ill and institutionalizing her, was the subject of the Clint Eastwood directed movie Changeling, is it?
Yes, with Angelina Jolie and John Malkovich.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
I know. That's I missed that movie when it came out too, and so I did not know, and that was right about when I was writing this too.
Now, they prosecuted his mother as well, Northcott's mother as well, didn't they?
Yeah. She said that she was the one that did all the murders and stuff. She was so devoted to her son. I've seen photos of her, and she was only like in her 40s, but she seriously looked like a 70-year-old woman who lived outside her whole life. I mean, she just looked like she just suffered forever. And, at his trial, she could only cry. She couldn't even answer anything. They just took her away. She couldn't even answer. She was just hysterical.
Mm-hmm. You said, too, that he was surprised, Northcott was surprised when they just read out his confession that he had blurted out. So it was like he made this defense, but was pretty well shattered by his own words, and he seemed to be kind of stunned by that.
Yeah, he should have just you can always look in hindsight, but I mean, he should have known better that he was absolutely crazy, and he would have just been put away into the sane asylum. They wouldn't have convicted him as a murderer or anything. Back in those days, especially, they would have just locked him up forever. Like that kid in Colorado that shot all those people in the theater, and he admitted he did it, and they still did a trial on him, and it's like the guy's obviously, there was something obviously wrong with him, and he should be put into some kind of mental institution. It's the way a lot of times, when people commit mass murders. There's like that woman who in Florida who drowned her kids in the tub. They dragged her out through this whole court case. And when that happens to me in America, I always feel that the prosecutor is just trying to grandstand to run for a higher office later or something, because it's obvious that, people are crazy when they commit such crimes. And to drag them through the court system and spend all that money for that is just, I believe, a waste of resources. And it also gives them publicity that, they either want or don't want. But, yeah, it's pretty obvious times when people are insane, and Northcott was definitely one of them. He ended up getting executed for it, too. I believe that if he would have just, pled insanity, he would have probably lived to be an old man.
Well, you've brought up the issue, so I have to jump in here a little bit in terms of, I understand what you're saying, but it is political. The way you have, compared to the Canadian system, you have politics being a main force in terms of somebody trying to get elected, and the trial just happens to be around that time, and the public it has already resonated with the public, and there's a certain amount of outrage, then you use that politically in terms of tough on crime and taking that and using it. But if you have a system where that's the way it's set up, then you will have those kinds of things. But there is still, bottom line, you do have more adherence to the victims' families and victims that got away, their needs and their wants, and a lot of that will be their wishes, and so some of that will be that a lot of people would think that we don't want to have any compassion for somebody that's capable of killing 8 or 10 people regardless. We don't want to. You talked about resources, so we're gonna somehow care about rehabilitating that person, but yet they fear, really, bottom line fear, and this is what really runs the entire issue, is that people fear that those people may be released someday.
Right.
So I think if they had an assurance that they would never ever be released, and because they're never ever going to be released, there's a less, investment in terms of actual rehabilitation. They're not going to be placed on the street. So that's what you have. But I got to tell you should just check out Canada sometime, and we have a gentleman named Vincent Lee, just to show you the contrast in the same judicial system, same laws, but somehow they've evolved in common law to the point where we have I'm pretty sure you're aware of the guy that killed and cannibalized the person on a Greyhound bus, and 7 years after that crime is released to a halfway house in Winnipeg. And the assurance is that a psychiatrist has seen him and assessed his risk as 1%, which I think is pathetically laughable.
Yeah.
1%, 0%, and this is based on somebody. I guess he will, for a certain period of time, for a long period of time, have supervision, so that his drug regimen is maintained. But I can't believe that we're so certain that medication or any medication can control this. I find it hard to believe, and I think that Americans would find it very, very hard to believe, and nothing like this Holmes gentleman being released in 7 or 14 or 21. There would be outrage, wouldn't there be?
Yeah, yeah. In America, most of the laws in the states are if you are judged insane in a crime and put away, if you are deemed sane, then they will try you for those crimes.
Mm-hmm. And in certain cases. But if you were unfit to stand trial, then you would have that. You would have that as well. But the thing is that there is such a small percentage of people that use the insanity defense to their advantage in serious crimes like murder. We'll talk murder. And then a very, very small I think it's a quarter, 25% of 1%, so almost no cases whatsoever. But like I say, what's very interesting, I think, and I hope an American audience is interested as well, because there's going to be more of these cases in Canada. There was a case in Montreal that's being retried now, but it really looks like the only reason it's being retried is that the mother of the victims, the 2 children, is a cardiologist. It's a doctor. Uh-huh. And his defense was insanity, temporary insanity, based on depression. He murdered his 2 children, and he did receive some time. He was held, of course, murder trial. He was held in custody. Uh-huh. That would have went towards a sentence. They used the insanity defense and the depression. It worked. He was put in an institution for 6 months and released free.
Wow, in 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, jeez. Well, there's a story.
That you could fix someone. That's the thing that I think is a dangerous. And when I think Americans hear that, they know. And I think I've got to warn people as well, is that if it works in this jurisdiction, mm-hmm. it can work in another liberal jurisdiction. They're always pushing the boundaries, as you know, what a lawyer will do, what he believes his role is, and what they believe their role is in pushing law, again, of course, to their client's advantage and to their advantage. But it's very interesting contrast between the two, I think.
Yeah. I lived in Wisconsin, and, there's the Ed Gein story. You know about them, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so So I had a lot of friends in Madison that were, very, very into it because, they're proud of their cannibals there. And, it's Jeffrey Dahmer. And so, but he was put away in prison or in a mental institution just outside of Madison called Mendota Hospital. And he lived out his life there. I think he lived to be 83 years old. I had a professor, my psychology professor at school there. She told me that when she was working for her PhD, she was working at Mendota as part of her program, and Ed Gein was there, and she said he was just the nicest, sweetest guy. You'd never know that he had done the horrible things that he did. But he was locked up forever, whereas Dahmer, they weren't so generous with him, but it might have been because it was a different time. Dahmer was, in the early 90s, and Ed Gein was in the 60s or the 50s.
Well, Dahmer, there's going to be a book called Dahmer Detective, and so I've got to say that already that there's going to be something out that I'm involved with as an editor. And always talk about that is that I had interviewed Robert K. Ressler and interviewed Mark, forgive me, the one half of the team of John Douglas and the Mindhunter team. So anyway, I won't just try to freeform his last name. Anyway, there was the controversy at the Dahmer trial in that Robert K. Ressler, a prominent profiler, again claiming that he invented it, and John Douglas, of course, claims he invented it, but they both were involved in the pioneering of criminal profiling at the FBI. Mm-hmm. And Robert K. Ressler went against his partner and said that Dahmer was insane. And Douglas said no. And I've looked at that case up and down, and I would say that I would agree with Douglas in that the only insane thing that Dahmer did is that he got unorganized. And unless you want to be super rigid with this organized killer, he became unorganized, and the real traumatic event in Dahmer's life at that time that made him all squirrely and unorganized and careless was he was very trepidatious about moving out of his apartment. Wow. So for a psychopath, you would think, what's is it the head sitting in acid or in my fridge? No. Geez,
or
I'm worried.
All the photos that he had collected, he was worried about getting caught or moving his dead body.
It was just moving. He wasn't never worried about being caught up to that point. His nonchalance in the face of no normal person would ever respond the way he responded. That's how you can fool people. That's how you fool police.
Yeah.
Because you don't have normal responses. The police know about normal responses, and so do most people. Yeah. They know something's up, even if they don't know what's up, right? So even in your book, you have cases where people, would have been killed, but they listened to a couple people arguing and said, "Hey, let's get out of here." So,
yeah.
So let's talk about the lady killer. Let's get back to San Mateo, Palo Alto, 1985 and 1942. So let's talk about the lady killer and the background before that. When you talk about December 7th, 1941.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, California was, and there's another case about that. It's kind of a direct result of it. But when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, that just changed everything, especially in California, where these small little country, grain elevator towns were turned into giant Air Force bases or Army bases, and the amount of people that had to come to California in order to work at the shipyards and the rail yards and everything that they needed just exploded. Especially in San Francisco, they had just a population explosion where overnight everything stayed open all night long. Movie theaters, stores, because they were running shifts 24/7. knocking out ships, especially not too far from where I live here, like in Vallejo and all that area. Mare Island was there. The ships would come back. They would get fixed from battle damage right in San Francisco, so they would go right through the city, and people would see it. All these African Americans from the South came up to work in the factories, and so all of a sudden they had this big influx of people of a very different culture, and it was a big mixing bowl, big tossed salad of different races and cultures and religions that was just thrown at California. It was like a big custard pie just thrown in the face of California. And pretty much the government was pretty much, you deal with it, you know.
Yeah.
So, these little tiny towns just turned into like, you know, rough and tumble cities. They still are, too. Some of the roughest towns in California were built during the war for housing and for all these people that came in. Vallejo, it's still pretty, you know, it's like Northeast Bay, and it's still pretty violent and poverty-ridden. And what they did is they built like 100,000 houses in 1 year, and those houses are still there. They were built temporary in the first place, and they never tore them down and built proper structures. So it's a very big slum. And there's actually in Vallejo, people are told not to get off the freeway, like just get gas or anything like that. It's like you just drive straight through. I know a bunch of stories about people that, you know, stopped in Vallejo, and the guy at the gas station said, "What the hell are you doing here? Get out of here! You're gonna die!" You know, it's just a very tough place. And now it's when San Francisco had its big housing boom, like it's still going through now. All the poor people that lived in San Francisco, which is basically was on Fillmore Street and that area, they got priced right out of their homes, and they all moved to the East Bay and mostly Vallejo. And you know, that's never a good situation when you have that many, you know, poor people moving to a place that's already poor.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about, you introduced 31-year-old Bernice Curtis, and you say she's a very good-looking woman. She had moved from Chicago. She was recently divorced. Our married sister lived in San Francisco, and she shared an apartment with a woman named Elsa Martin, and she worked as a clerk at a cigar store. And then on November 23rd, 1942, Santa Clara Sheriff's deputies discovered her fully clothed body, beaten to death, and her fingers and her jaw were broken, and the back of her skull cracked, and her face shoved in the mud of a plowed field near an intersection south of Palo Alto. So it looks like she had put up a struggle, but it didn't look like it was robbery was the motive. So tell us about what proceeds with the sheriff's detectives and how they start learning about Bernice Curtis.
Well, they did an investigation about her, and they found out that she was a very attractive person who was very nice, and everyone liked her. She worked in a cigar store, and there'd be thousands of people a day come in there just buy a cigar. A lot of them probably just come in just to see her. I mean, we all have that place, it seems. I know I go to one coffee shop just because somebody is so beautiful, and it just makes my day. And they found her in this freshly plowed field, and now that area is very expensive subdivision area. That whole area is not even close to being a muddy field. They checked her background, and you know, everything kind of came out fine. She was just a person living on her own. Her ex-husband was in the Army, and he was out in the South Pacific, so we knew that he didn't do it. And her brother-in-law said that she was dating a tall, dark, and handsome Latino man named Frank. And they did some more investigation. But they were going out for about 3 weeks, and he would always buy her a corsage of lavender, sweet peas, and gardenias. And it was always from the same flower shop that was near where she lived. Like, he would stop there before he went over to her house, and they'd go on a date. He worked in a shipyard in South San Francisco, and he was divorced, had a daughter. I loved it when they said he had like a pencil mustache, so he was kind of a hipster guy. They were out clubbing at some nightclub in San Jose, and I thought that was kind of odd because that's quite a distance. They have that song, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? And that's because it's hard to get to that town because there's like 15 different freeways you have to change on, and there's like no easy way to get to San Jose. But they went there that night to this nightclub called the Hawaiian Gardens, and after she was murdered, her photo was in the newspaper, and people at work there said, hey, she was here with another couple, and this guy they knew was Frank. Frank turned out to be a Filipino-American from San Bruno, and worked as a pipe fitter or ship fitter or something like that. The cops had their eye on him for a long time because of a murder that happened in 1935, and they found her underneath a railroad overpass on East Poplar Avenue in San Mateo. And again, San Mateo is like a very nice town these days, and the overpass is still there, which I found really amazing in a way. I guess they don't go away, but it's kind of odd when it's like, wow, it's still there. But they found this woman there that was murdered, and the police had thought that he was the guy that did it, but they could never prove it. He'd always lawyer up, but it was to the point where he used a really unusual gun. It was made from Germany, and it was some strange caliber, and there was only 6 of them registered in the entire state of California. And one of the owners of the gun was his father, and his father reported it stolen a couple of months before that murder happened. His father ran like a pool hall tavern or something. But he always hired, his father would hire a hotshot attorney, and he'd get him out. He got him out of it, and the cops were still like, I'm watching you, if you mess up, we're going to come back at you about it. So he had already murdered in 1935, and here it was like 7 years later, did it again.
Now, the thing is with... they have him on, he was that main suspect in that other murder, so then they question him, and he is real nonchalant, but then when he sees the body, he breaks down and he starts crying, doesn't he?
The body of
Robinson.
Of Robinson? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's hard to. It's a hard guy to pin down. He was a bad guy.
Now, there's enough evidence for Bernice Curtis. There's bloody clothing at his home, at his hotel room in San Bruno. So, at the trial, he's represented, and there's enough evidence at this crime scene. Like I say, there's even a green feather is found at the crime scene, which matched perfectly a feather stub of a hat that was owned by Alcalade, and some other evidence. So,
yeah, they found
so there's a bunch of compelling evidence.
Light.
So yes, absolutely. So what happens at this trial as a result with all this compelling evidence, and how does he respond?
Well, he denied that he did such a thing. And they had a bus driver went by and saw the car with the door open, and in the early morning hours when that happened, a hat check girl from that Hawaiian club came out, and he had some coworkers he had asked. He was always bragging about his dating life and stuff, and he told them that he wanted to go back to his wife, but Bernice was the marrying kind. He'd have to get rid of her. His father also set up a line of somebody else making an excuse for his alibi, and his wife came in during the recess, and she grabbed his attorney and just walked out. She didn't say a thing to him. He claimed that he had that she had a date with another guy the day he died, and no one believed him. His alibi was torn to shreds. He did a 15-day trial too, which is actually pretty long for in those days. He ended up being sentenced to death, and his wife died just a few years later from pneumonia or something, and he went to the gas chamber in 1944.
And he cursed as he entered the gas chamber. Yeah. Now that does lead us to Head and Hands, another very, very bizarre story that happens in Temple City, Los Angeles County. And this is December 30th, 1945, so we're around the same time. And you introduce some characters here. Frederick Eggers, and he's the sheriff of San Francisco from 1912 to 1915.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about this Eggers and what happens in this little community.
Yeah, his father came over from Germany and was on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, which is, the Board of Supervisors elect the mayor in San Francisco. It's kind of done differently than other cities. And, ambitious guy and, new immigrant and stuff. His son, Arthur, ended up moving to Southern California, lived in Temple City, which was, it's like another town east of San Francisco. And it was pretty close to where the Ape Boy was. And, the town that the Ape Boy was living in is called Wineville. And they ended up changing the name of the city because the murder was so bad they changed it to Mira Loma. So that's, to get back on that one, that's like the criminal was so bad that the town where he lived changed the name of the town. But Edgar's, he was just a working stiff guy and living in Temple City, and there was all the military base. I think that's where they had tanks training and stuff out there. And now, of course, it's like all, pretty much all houses and stuff. So during the war, people their lives were tossed out. Their little towns are full of men and women that weren't from there, and everyone had anxiety from the war. My own parents got married after only meeting each other once. And my dad was a dashing Air Force lieutenant, and and my mom was a nice Polish girl from East Chicago, Indiana, and they met at her brother's house, and they ended up getting married. I didn't know about this until I was in my 30s, that they had only seen each other twice before they'd gotten married. And that happened a lot there. People became very promiscuous, and everyone was drinking a lot and was saying, why not? We're having a world war. Let's just break out the booze and have a ball, as the song goes. The Edgars, his wife, God, what was her name?
Dorothy.
Dorothy, yeah. Dorothy, okay, because I wrote this book like 7 years ago, too, so it's been a while. But Dorothy, she'd hang out at the bars, and she'd have her little flings and things like that, and it caused tension in the household, but, they argued and things like that. But, they stayed together, who's to judge anyone's marriage. But on just January 2nd, 1946, and by this time, the war was over, but, things had to wind down. There were thousands and thousands of soldiers and sailors and airmen waiting at, like in Oakland, at their train station. There were 16,000 people a day couldn't get a train to leave town. So, 1946 was a pretty rough time. If you look at the headlines during that time, too, there was lots of crime. There was lots of murders and rapes. And you got all these guys that just came back from risking their lives and were used to killing people and used to, they became semi-animals while they're out there. But January 2nd wasn't a good day for Dorothy. And they found her headless and handless torso in a canyon. She was wrapped in a blanket and tied with rope, and it was off the Rim of the World Highway, which is one of the greatest roads you can ever take. It's in western San Bernardino County, not far from Los Angeles. She had 2 bullet holes in her, and she wasn't there for longer than 48 hours. So her husband, Arthur, worked at the police department, the sheriff's department in western Los Angeles County, and he went over to San Bernardino County to view the body, and they didn't, let him. It didn't matter that he had, credentials from Los Angeles County. It didn't matter. So he called his brother-in-law, started pretending that she was missing, and just played that part, like, hey, where'd my wife go? I better file a missing persons report. And, he worked for the police department. He was just some kind of clerk or something like that at a substation. But on December 30th, he had returned from his job. He worked the evening shift, and he found his wife with another man. The guy ran out of the house, ran down the street, and that's when they figured that's when he killed her. And he shot her with a .380 and then proceeded to cut up her body in the bathtub, sawed off her head and hands and feet, and they were married for 18 years, too. He wrapped her up and put her in a car and went up on the Rim of the World Highway and dumped her in a canyon. And because he did it at night, he didn't realize that the body, basically fell to where it landed on the side of the road. It wasn't that far off. So, it's almost, in a way, it's almost cartoonish, where he's like, okay, I'll just toss her off this cliff. They'll never find her. And then, she lands like on a road farther down the cliff.
Now, in January, the police are on to him, so he gets charged for this grand theft auto, and this is the most fascinating thing, especially when, in light of how much stock people make in lie detector tests. This Eggers submits to a lie detector test. Tell us what happens. He's confident. What happens?
They tied him up. And there's a great picture of him tied up to the lie detector machine, and he remained cool and calm, and he passed it with flying colors. And then as soon as the test was done, he admitted to killing his wife and drew a map. And they had looked around, and they were very suspicious of him. He had sold his wife's car. He'd forged her name, and he sold it to a cop that worked with him. And he had cleaned up the trunk and things, and but once he passed it, for some reason he admitted to the crime. He could have been let go scot-free for all we know, or it would have been very hard to convict him. But he said that he burned her head and hands in their incinerator, and they didn't find anything, any residue of her, and he had said that he had buried the ashes and stuff like that. So he said it was against the law to burn anything after noon in the town that he lived in Temple. Like always, they always change their mind about the confession and stuff. But there was blood in the car trunk that the police officer owned. They found blood in the drains. The .380 bullet matched his gun. They found a bone fragment in his gun, like between the magazine and the gun. Like somehow, must have fell while he was cutting her up or something. But he got the gas chamber too, and in a matter of 2 years, he was put to death for his crime.
Wow. Well, let's change course a little bit. We just have a little bit more time, but I'd like to get to one of these stories because this was a very, very, very unusual. What strikes me the most about historical crime is how similar it is to modern crime. It's just different characters, different circumstances, but the behavior, this narcissistic, the psychopathic, they existed a long time ago. So it's very fascinating to me because I guess I'm like a lot of people that think that it's a fairly newer phenomena, the serial killers and this type of violence, but from this book, not so. So let's talk about Penny for her thoughts, and this is Daly City, February 1st, 1959, a little bit more recent, and 21-year-old gardener August Norrie. And tell us a little bit about August Norrie and who he meets up with. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this chapter has always blown me away because I had read about it before in various books, and they always wrote that August Norrie was this man slut, tomcat, he was going after women all the time, and he was married and all this. And I found exactly the opposite when I started researching this story. And it even got weirder towards the end. But August was like a 20-year-old guy. He former Marine sharpshooter, was wounded in Korea, got education in GI Bill to study landscape architecture, and he worked at the Lake Merced Country Club, which is a very, very fine place. So he had a job and all that, and he was married just for only 18 months, baby on the way, and, he was just a family guy. And all these other stories written about this all say that he was a man about town, a nightclubber, and all this stuff. I even when I was doing the research and going through the paper, I really followed it through the San Mateo Times, which was their local newspaper. They didn't say anything like that in the paper. I don't know how these other writers came up with that, but it's totally not true. And they found them just shot to pieces in the hills in San Bruno, just outside. San Bruno is like you cross the street and you're in San Francisco. It's just one of those older suburbs there. And they found his body near Lover's Lane type area, but what had happened is that he was driving his Chrysler New Yorker, very nice car, especially during those days. It's one of those giant cars you can have, expensive cars, like on the level of a Cadillac or something. Mm-hmm. And he saw this girl, Penny Borglund, walking, and they say that they were familiar with each other, and that's where all these like tomcat things come up. But his widow says that he did not know her. He saw her just walking. He asked her if she wanted to ride, and she jumped in the car and started shooting this gun out the window. And he was kind of like, hey, what you doing? It's kind of dangerous. And back then, people could just shoot guns out of the car windows, and they stopped. And he was up there because he had a weekend job doing some landscaping work, and he had he had his trunk full of a bunch of just, recycled green waste, and they just dumped it up there. So they drove. He drove with her, and the hill was just above her house. I mean, it wasn't that far away from her either. And they stopped, and she pulled out the gun and shot him 8 times. 6 times. It was a revolver. And she reloaded 3 more times. She shot him 18 times. And 14 of the bullets went right completely through his body. And he was shot like 3 times in the head, 3 times in the neck, chest, stomach. She shot him in each of his limbs, too. So the cops, when they found him, they were like, what the hell? This must have been a crime of passion. Nobody shoots that many people, that many times, unless it's like a real vendetta. They found a kid who almost got hit by a Norrie's car, and he said there was like a blonde-haired young girl driving it, and it's like, what the hell happened, So they go over to Darlene, his wife. They go over to his house, and they question her like crazy. They question her family like crazy. Turns out that, like, her brother was a San Francisco police officer. His best friend, August Norrie's best friend, was his brother-in-law, too. And, his idea of a fun night was to go to his in-laws' house and watch the TV, which was pretty rare back then, and watch TV shows and stuff. And so the police found that, the guy was charming and handsome and stuff like that, and but, there was no reason for anybody to kill him, especially to shoot him so many times. And the police, this whole case was just solved on just detective footwork, That's how they found anything, because they had no idea who would kill this guy. And after 2.5 months, the case started getting quiet, and Darlene was getting hassled by the police a lot. And the cops found out that the bullets were like a Target bullet, and they were made in molds, and this company in New Jersey made them and sold them. And they narrowed it down to who bought them in San Francisco, what store had them wholesale, and who sold them, and who they were sold to. So these guys, after like 10 weeks, finally traced it down to this kid, this 23-year-old guy, and they, squeezed him a bit, I guess, and found out that the gun or the bullets that he had given some to Penny Borglum. Now, Penny had stolen the gun from a friend's house. She knew that her friend's father had a gun in some, china cabinet or something, and she managed to steal it, and she went out and shot it a few times with a friend before that. So when the cops came to Borglum's house and her family home, and she only lived, they were 3 blocks from the city limits of San Francisco, and she just pretty much said, they got there before she got home from work, and she was cute, full figure girl, wore the poodle skirts and freckles, and she had strawberry blonde hair and a ponytail, and just a 1959 girl, city girl, and they found. She let them search her room, and they found, like, newspaper clippings of the murders and things like that. And they brought her in for questioning, and she ended up admitting what she did. And she said that she had always wanted to kill somebody. And she just had this urge for about 1.5 years. She said it was almost a sexual urge to kill somebody for several years. And, this is just a normal girl. She worked... She graduated from high school and got a job as a clerk in some business in San Francisco and stuff. And I found weird is that I would have been interested if they found any existentialist books in her collection or anything, because this sounds like it's right out of Albert Camus' The Stranger, where she just kills somebody to see what it does. But the things that she said it's just shocking. She said, "I felt better mentally after she shot him. I felt like a great burden was lifted off me. I have no bad memories about it. I always wanted to see if I could do something like this and not have it bothered me." And the police, these career police detectives were just stunned.
And with this as well, the expert witnesses that you would normally think would be trotted into court to try to explain her behavior, even though she is adamant that she's not insane, they were in agreement there was nothing wrong with her.
Right.
Psychologically.
Yeah, nothing wrong with her psychologically. She just had an overpowering urge to kill someone. And, she had to reload. That's the amazing thing. That's just, it's like, oh, what should I do? I'll reload and shoot him some more. And she stuck to her story and never cried, showed any emotion. She was incarcerated. She told the police matron that she hated their parents because they made her go to church. But other than that, she had no family problems. She wasn't like a bad kid. Some people say that she had once brought a knife to school to show everybody. And personally, I didn't think that was that big of a deal because, I'm an older person and stuff. It's like a family tradition in my family that when you have your first Holy Communion when you're about 8 years old, the gift you get is a pocket knife. And, I've carried a pocket knife since I was 8 years old. I used to go to school with it and all that stuff. And so I didn't think that it would be that unusual for somebody to, do a little show and tell with their personal friends on their lunch break, like saying, hey, look what I got. At least in those days or up to my time in the mid-'70s, that wasn't unusual for somebody to do. Penny didn't. She said she knew that her parents were upset, and she said that's really too bad. It's not really her concern. And they had all these psychiatrists come in.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that it seems to be very, very liberal law here is that she's sentenced eventually to life in prison, but it made her eligible for parole in 7 years. And you say that It's not really sure of the record, but it looks like it was believed that she was paroled in the mid-'60s.
Yes, she was. And so after this book came out, I was on the TV show Deadly Women, right? I was on 2 episodes of that, both from this book. And because of that, I was getting calls from the producer, and they're like, well, where is Darlene Norrie and her daughter? And I don't know, I must have better investigative skills than most people because I found both of them within an hour. Actually, I found their daughter, who she told me, and she lives like in maybe 70, 80 miles from here, not too far away, north of the Bay Area. And I just called her out of the blue, and she answered, and she said that she was almost 30 years old before she found out that her stepfather wasn't her father, and that and she didn't even know about what happened to her real father. So it was a big shock to her, and not long after that, I said, well, here's my number if your mother would like to talk for this Deadly Women thing. It'd be nice. I certainly didn't want to bother her. She, those are horrible memories to bring up. And out of the blue, she called me a couple of days later, and I'd never broke out in a cold sweat faster in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I answered her with yes, ma'am, and no, ma'ams. And she told me the story of how it was for her. And Peggy was let go. She wasn't even told. She wasn't even told when she was sentenced and things like that. They just ignored her. You know, you think she's the widow of this, and yeah, she's a grandmother now, and probably great grandmother, and yeah, she never talked about it for 30 years or so until that happened. And she told me that I was the only person that ever got it right. I still had some mistakes, but she said that I'm the only person that actually, you know, got most of it right. So that made me feel really good. Yeah, it was really stunning, to say the least. When I was done with the call, my wife looked at me and she was like, "What happened?" It was like that bad. She thought some family member died or something. Wow. I was white and covered with sweat. I was like, because I just did not expect her to even not only call me, but she did take part of that episode. Not too long ago, I found Penny Borglund, and she didn't return any of my inquiries, but I found it was like a Ventura County newspaper clipping, and she was helping out at a senior citizens home, and she was dancing with somebody in this picture, and it said, Penny Borglund, volunteer at Ventura, whatever, blah, 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 dances with a, patient. I was like, what? But she obviously doesn't want to talk about it. And I thought it would be weird that she didn't change her name.
Yeah, sorry. We have just enough time for one more, and I think it's inappropriate because this is one of the more shocking stories I've ever read. And this is, especially for the time, I think I would have been aware of this, I would think. April 11th, 1981, in Plumas County, and the Keddy murders. And so tell us about the Sharp family and what they were doing and how they got in this position. Introduce this story for us. This is an incredibly wild story.
Yeah, it is a truly troubling story, and it is still a mystery. The Sharp family, her husband James he took a job out of state, and they were down in their luck. It's the 80s, things weren't that great, and so her and her family stayed in a cabin at this resort called the Keddy Resort. It would be, I don't know, maybe 150 miles north of Sacramento, right in the mountains. So it used to be a resort where a train would take people from San Francisco, and they would stop there, and it got run down after a while because of cars, and people were able to go on their own without the train. And it is way out there. I still haven't even been out in that area. I've lived in California for 15 years. I've been all over it. Still haven't been out there. It's in kind of the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. So they were renting out the cabins to people to live there because the tourist season, the tourists just didn't come out there anymore. So they were living there, and this is just so strange. Her son and a friend of his, they're just teenagers, and they were goofing around. They thought it was a Friday night, and they thought, we'll go to this other town, see if there's a party, a town called Quincy, which actually another very horrible crime happened there later. They hitchhiked down there, went to a kegger party out in the woods, and had a couple of beers, and so they smoked some weed, and then they hitchhiked back to Keddy. And in that area, the cops know everybody. It's not many people live there, and so they go to they come back home, and then just the next day, the police find this horrible crime scene. The entire family was butchered and beaten to death and tied with electrical cord and duct tape. They were all beaten to a pulp. Multiple stab wounds. they used, whoever did this used, household articles that were just there already, a steak knife, butcher knives, hammers and stuff like that. Blades were broken in them and stuff. And they killed their mother. Their kids were having a sleepover there too, and so she had some neighbor kids there. They didn't hear anything. Her daughter was at a sleepover, and she came back home, and she found her mom. She found the two friends, John and Dana, beaten to death. The younger kids that were staying over were fine. They were in the back room, but one of their daughters was missing. 13-year-old Tina. So this house is just covered in blood. This is a tranquil place. And the cops came, and I don't know if the cops did a bad job. They should have called the state police in to help. But it was a horrible crime. And these two kids slept through it, a toddler and two adolescent kids. And say anything that happened. It's never been solved. There's been over 4,000 hours of investigation. There's been a lot of speculation. They have no idea what had happened. They eventually found Tina's body out in the mountains, Feather Falls in Butte County, which would be another couple hundred miles away. They found her body in 1984. Just their skeletal remains, 60 miles north of Ketty. It's never been solved. A few years ago, they tore down the cabin because there were so many sightseers and looky-loos going over there. I personally have a friend of mine who has this website, the Countess Despair, and it's always about all things murder, and she went there and did a whole photo thing on it. They've never caught. They don't know. They said it could have been a hobo jumping off the train, but it also could have been the kids, the boys, might have been hitchhiking, and the person that picked them up, the kid said, "Hey, come on over to our house," or something like that, and that's what happened. But somebody just totally went berserk in this small town. So there's a guy who's been making videos about it for quite a few years, and when I had a website, he used to comment on it quite often. I've talked to other people, and they said that he had become so obsessed about it that a lot of people don't even talk to him anymore, because it's like the only thing he can talk about is trying to solve this case. Never solved it.
Yeah, it does seem to dominate some people's lives in some of these cases. They get so interested, and the amateur sleuth comes out of them. And I had that phenomenon with Hunting a Psychopath, East Area Rapist, original Night Stalker, again, a California case that captivated Californians and Americans and everyone else for years, but especially people in that area. And again, unsolved really does drive people mental. If it's, never mind, we never understand the killer's mind, but we really don't understand when we don't even apprehend the persons. So, very incredible tale, incredible unsolved case. You did mention in that story as well that there was all kinds of finger pointing, but there also was talk of Satanism. Was there any ritualistic evidence? Was there any evidence of ritualistic murder, or was there anything like that you found?
No. In rural areas, people tend to believe more in Satanism and things like that, and that's always an easy thing to point out. But unless I'm wrong, I don't believe that there was any kind of Satanism involved in it. It was. I think that the murderers were done by an opportunist, thought that there might be money or something, and these people were poor, and he took the 13-year-old to probably torture and murder. And I don't know if they'll ever find this case. They tore down the house.
No,
they tore down the cabin.
Again, it doesn't. I hate to say it doesn't make that much logical sense for somebody to be picking someone up, but then lends themselves to be, again, an opportunity for maybe robbery, unlikely people to be robbed, and then this, you do talk about this incredible overkill, which seems to not, again, if it was robbery or opportunity, still there was just, it seems to be a real slaughterhouse, this place, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's unexplainable why or how it even happened. Also, the cabins were all very close together, like less than 6 feet from each other. Because it was like a summer resort place, and no one heard anything, which I think that maybe the neighbors should have been looked at a little more. It's been 30 years now. Who knows if they're even alive? But if I was a police detective, I would have definitely really pressured the closest neighbors.
But it does seem that a combination of things, the time, the small town, resources from a county sheriff's department, and also just that there really wasn't, again, we didn't have the benefit of the blood typing, was just that they could see that it was the family's blood all over the walls, and they couldn't see any other blood types. So it was blood type O. But again, if they found another blood type, that wouldn't tell them much, really.
Yeah.
It would tell them, it would give them a little bit more of an indication, but again, it seemed like there was a dramatic lack of evidence, even for that time. Because we talk about historical crimes, so it seemed like an incredible lack of any kind of evidence that would lead to anything else. To any kind
it could have just been dumb luck for the killer or killers that they didn't leave any evidence in such a violent scene. Because they all fought, too, for the most part, especially the mother. And, you would think out in the quiet mountains that the neighbors would have heard.
Yeah.
The guy left the place through the back door, which was on a hill, so there were stairs going down. And they found a blood print there or something, but they couldn't come up with anything.
Yeah. Well, you say that there was no evidence of Satanism, but what I got to say is that, the evil that these people perpetrate, and this person or persons perpetrated, is certainly ranks right up there anyway. That even if it's don't believe in the mythological Satan, at least that entity in theory, if we were to look at it, they'd be awfully proud of that kind of murder and mayhem and mystery and horror in a little small town. That's certain.
Yeah.
And the poor girl, what was she, Sheila, 14, and she discovers the carnage of her family?
Yeah. I wonder what it's like for her now. I'm working on a story right now. I'm writing my new book, and the children were involved. They weren't involved, but they were there afterwards. And I found some things that she had written on some old websites from like 2006, and I felt bad for her just with that, because it was like a crime thing. And she was like, hey, I'd really like to talk to some other people that experienced having their parents murdered, or their, especially by their own mother. And I just thought, oh man, that just, what a horrible thing, especially if your mother killed your father or something. How could you deal with that? You're like an instant orphan.
Well, absolutely. And what's discouraging to me is when, especially in this country, but when the murderer, perpetrator of heinous crimes is in court and then trots out the sob story of the abuse or the verbal abuse or the neglect, or that they didn't know their parents, and yet these other people seem to have to, in this, again, bizarro world where they have to adapt, they have to rehabilitate themselves, and they have to, continue, basically, despite this PTSD, this trauma, this depression, and yet somehow, and that's, I think, why a lot of people don't shed a tear for killers and rapists and pedophiles. They just don't, because too much time has to be spent. I think just makes sense that you would shed a tear, or less proverbially, you would be more concerned about the victim and the victim's families and those impacted by these perpetrators.
Yeah,
certainly.
and we all know people that grew up with a very, violent home life and stuff. I didn't grow up in exactly, Leave It to Beaver world. My parents were first and second immigrants to America. They still had a lot of old world thoughts, and my mom used to hit us with a belt and all that stuff, and I thought it was normal until I became an adult and was talking to other people, and I'm like, yeah, and my mom would come out with a belt and beat me, and they were like, oh my God, And my brother said once that, it's like we could all grown up to be serial killers, but we didn't. We all.
I don't buy into that. That's another thing I just don't buy into. I really don't think that the normalization of these uber deviant personalities is constructive at all, thinking that we have something, most people, vast majority of people have anything in common with a person that has the capacity to kill, torture, rape, dismember, and then go for lunch. There's no way anybody's going to convince me, and certainly not a team of self-serving psychiatrists or wannabe psychologists, that somehow we have something in common with these people. Oh, we all have the capacity to kill under the right circumstances. No, we don't. I don't believe that. I don't see any proof of that whatsoever, ever. We likely have a hard time defending ourselves even when we should be righteous about that. And so what do? I mean, vigilante, we always talk about, well, there would be a risk of the vigilante justice, but it doesn't happen anymore. There's outrage, but there's not that. So I think people have to rethink this, despite I don't have degrees behind my name, but I think that I could assemble a lot of evidence to prove my case in that we don't all have the capacity to kill, and what's unique about killers and rapists and pedophiles is their capacity to do crimes that are clearly outlawed by society, not frowned upon, outlawed. Everyone knows the line.
Yep.
And everyone knows what it is. And these people, these losers, want to transgress. For whatever reason, I can't figure them out. I'm sure they couldn't figure them out, and I'm sure a psychiatrist in an hour or 2 years can't figure them out either. But that capacity to kill, that capacity to go over that line over and over and over again is not a mental illness that we should excuse or we should think that we have something in common with. These people are, I think any true crime writer would agree, these people are unique. These killers are unique and should not be, I mean, certainly there's murders that seem more understandable. Regardless, I don't think the vast majority of people have the ability to kill impulsively, kill as a product of rage, but then sit down and calculate the dismemberment and disposal of that body and then their cover story.
Right.
That is unique, and I think that should be reserved for these kinds of people, and there's nothing that reading hundreds of true crime books has told me otherwise, that these people are truly unique, and there's just degrees of evil, as Michael Stone has said on his program, just different degrees. That's my idea anyway.
Yeah, and, sure there are some people who, maybe their father or, their parents or somebody was completely evil, and that's their template for life. But to use that as a template, for how you are is, that's no excuse, because there's just so many people out there in the world that had the worst life imaginable, and they don't go around killing people. I have dozens of friends. I have one friend right now. He's getting his PhD at age 57, and he was kicked out of his house when he was 14. Lived on the streets of Ann Arbor. Was an alcoholic and drug addict and all this stuff. And now he's getting a medical degree.
Mm-hmm.
When if that kind of logic was, it would be, he should have been a serial killer.
No, I don't. I think there's no correlation. I think that given my understanding of what a lawyer will say, can say, and believes he should say, is that those mitigating factors are provided by his client without doing any research as to whether those claims are true or not. In particular case I was involved in, it just made claims of abuse for the against allegations against the stepbrother that was still alive. There was never any investigation whatsoever, and the mother. So, and yet the mother was the person that adopted him into his family, and from the person that couldn't take care of him, these people took care of him. So what I say is that I think that the mitigating factors, the talk, the allegations of abuse, at least in the cases that I know of, they don't have to be substantiated whatsoever. So are they real evidence of anything? And so what would I say if I was charged and alleged to have done something? Then I would give the most viable excuse I could possibly give to my lawyer, and he would trot it out in that courtroom. Yet it doesn't seem to make any sense that there's a correlation between sexual abuse and then that person becoming an abuser, a rapist, when if you looked at the thousands and millions of women who are raped, there is not one scintilla of evidence that those women, even a small minority, go on to be rapists or sexual abusers. So again, then what can you conclude? Well, it's only men, and then it becomes now we all get included, all men, because we have some testosterone, or genetic. So it's genetic. So Hitler. So now we wall up Germany because it's genetic.
Yeah, right.
Nazism is genetic. So organic brain disease after the fact, they go, yeah, well, he did fall on his head. I'm 56 years old. I know all my friends fell on their heads too.
Yeah.
You play hockey, you play football, you hit your head.
Yeah.
So give a lawyer a chance, and there's a myriad of excuses and defenses after the fact. That's what psychiatrists can do and psychologists. After the fact, assemble this odd behavior, something that looks like, and again, it's a dangerous, slippery slope, because in the end, someone's dead, someone's responsible, there's that carnage, and as your books point out, once upon a time how we dealt with this was just a rope.
Yeah. A
rope and a quick trial, and that was how justice was done. So we've come a long way. I don't believe in the death penalty, but I do believe in people taking responsibility, and I do not appreciate the move towards the normalization of murder. It is never normal and should not be treated as, well, they're likely not to reoffend. If we base that in every bit of law, then no one would ever go and no one would ever stay, because that's not the barometer. It should be at least safety and ensuring safety. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's do we have time for the death house in Davis? Because that's a case where we're just out of the blue. That guy killed his entire family.
Let's talk about Death House in Davis. That's one of the cases I wanted to talk about, and we've handled everything else. So let's talk about Death House in Davis.
Yeah, it's a pretty short one. It happened in 1972 in Davis. Davis is the home of the University of California, Davis. It's one of the most outstanding agricultural science veterinarian schools in the world. People come from all over the world to go to school there. And, Davis has always been, they were like the first town to have bicycle paths, like in the 1950s or something. They've always been this forward-thinking place. So this professor at UC Davis, and he worked his way up. He was in his 40s. He had worked his way up, mopping floors and working his way to getting his PhD, and he ended up becoming a professor. He worked on DDT. He was the guy that put together that DDT was making eggshells of predator birds too fragile, right? So he's the guy that figured this out. And he had this old, beautiful farm with horses and stables and all these outbuildings and stuff. and just on the outside of Davis. Right now it's in the middle of Davis. And him and his wife separated, and he just moved to an apartment down the street, not too far. And he went back to his house and killed his entire family, all of his kids, and yeah, it was just horrible. You know, he killed his 3 children, and one of them was a young teenage boy who was coming home from a dance, and you know, that's just like, I'm the same age as that kid was. I remember, you know, going to those school dances in 1972 and stuff. And he came home about 11:30, and he bashed his head in when he came in. He dragged all the bodies upstairs in the master bedroom, laid them face up, and then poured gasoline all over the house and burned it up. And I went to that place. It still exists. It was just sold about maybe 5 years ago. And when I was writing this book, I came across that story first. And I just hopped in my car and went out there to take a look. The house was completely burnt down. These big oak trees around it were still burnt and scorched. And the stables, the barns that were all there, I found evidence of some graduate students who had squatted there with their books and notes and all that stuff. I thought that was kind of funny. But, yeah, it was this beautiful place. And now they're going to keep the barn and a couple other of the outbuildings that were in good shape, and they're going to build like a green community subdivision there. But the owners, it was his wife's mother and her family ended up getting the title to the estate, and they just left it as it was for all those years. And they ended up, once the mother died, her surviving kids sold the place for a lot of money, actually like $5 million. But when I went there was still, post hitched a horse up to, you know, and just like there was still evidence of like their family that lived there, old toys, you know, in sheds and things like that. And it was just one of the most eerie places I've ever been. And then while I was going through all these like buildings that were falling down, I realized I didn't tell anybody I was going here. I didn't even tell my wife, because it was just like, oh, I gotta go check it out. You know, Davis is 20 miles away, and I was like, oh God, I could like fall through one of these floors here, and they'll find me like 6 years from now, you know. But I think that possibly the reason why the professor just wigged out was that he was around DDT and all these other chemicals that he did with his experiments.
Interesting.
Could have poisoned him or just made him nuts. But
there was no other evidence. There's no other evidence. Like today, this familicide would be lots of times it's the patriarch is having problems financially, or something is going to hit his legacy or his health, and so in a weird thought process, they'd say, well, I want to take the whole family with me. So there was no evidence of anything that we would associate with these more recent murders of the last 20 years where somebody destroys their whole family. Yeah,
no, he was, actually they had a pretty good separation, and that he was there and, you know, was with the kids and cleaning the barns and, you know, helping out there all the time. It's just they were just taking a break. And the students didn't see anything different with them. And it just came completely out of the blue. Completely out of the blue.
Yeah, I guess, again, this book reinforces that murder doesn't change too much. It's just the characters and the places and the victims, but very much the same motivations. I guess people don't change that much, I guess, over the decades, over the centuries, but very, very interesting. I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about Death in California. For those people that would like to look for other work, do you have a website, and if they want to contact you? let us
Yeah,
know about
my website I took down, and if they want to contact me, I'm probably the easiest guy in the world to find on the internet. I have a Facebook page. I have a Facebook author page. I'm a very easy person to find, and I always enjoy hearing from people who either have an opinion about something, or they tell me straight out I'm wrong, or they share a story with me. I always appreciate that. I had in the California Justice book, I wrote about the Bright brothers who had shot a bunch of police officers and were on the run. And I've had relatives of his write me and say, they were bad guys, and other ones would say not. And one guy accused me of saying that they were actually innocent and blah, blah, blah. And I wrote back the guy, I said, if they were actually innocent, I would have written about it. It would have made a better story, I mean, it's not my job to make history the way I want it to. That's not. I don't know of any historian that would ever not put in information that he found or she found while they were writing it. After it's done, sometimes you find out things, but when you're writing it, you look for. You want to find out, could these guys been innocent? That's a better story. That's a way of setting history straight. There was nothing I saw that made those guys seem innocent at all. But
well, it's just people involved hate to think that their loved one is a killer, and that's going to drive it. I mean, the saddest cases that I see are the bum that can't. He can't admit that even though he's been convicted, his appeals are finished, and yet he's still got to drag his family to the prison on this thing that he's innocent, and what is the family supposed to do? Yeah. What are they going to... They're doomed either way. They know the truth, they're doomed. They lived a lie, they're doomed. It's such a sad... These losers, and that's what these people are, and you have it in your book as well. Some of these guys are so brave, but then they're crying, and when they're going into the gas, they're reluctantly being dragged into the gas chamber after there were people torturing kids. So it's incredible.
Just like
it never changes the cowardice of some of these people. So it's fascinating. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about your equally interesting and fascinating book, Death in California. I want to thank you very much, David Kulczyk, for coming on. Once again, thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.